Hey everyone, welcome to the 101st edition of DF Direct Weekly. This is indeed our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. Let's get straight into it. First of all, the roll call. Fresh from describing his immensely detailed hair care regimen, it's Tom Morgan.
I watched it just this morning just for this 101st episode, so it's a bit of a treat.
We're honoured. And, of course, John Linneman.
Rich, that's I don't know, having Tom here, his hair is pretty distracting. It's just too darn good looking. I keep looking over there like, oh man,
Certain
beautiful locks.
for sure.
Absolutely.
Let's go straight into the first news topic. So this has been a very interesting story that's rolled out this week. Essentially, last week at the State of Play, Baldur's Gate 3 was revealed for PlayStation 5. And the developer Larian followed that up by saying that there is no actual console exclusivity with it. However, there is no Xbox version of the game announced for release, dare I say it, in the here and now. John, do you want to take up this story? Because it's quite involved and actually has some pretty profound implications, I think, for game development going forward.
Yeah, so I think their statement needs to be read very carefully.
Should we read the statement?
Yeah, so they actually say, we've had an Xbox version of Baldur's Gate 3 in development for quite some time, or some time. It said, we've run into some technical issues in developing the Xbox port that have stopped us feeling 100% confident in announcing it until we're certain we found the right solutions. Specifically, we've been unable to get split-screen co-op working to the same standards on both Xbox Series X and S, which is a requirement for us to ship. There's no platform exclusivity preventing us from releasing BG3 on Xbox day and date, should that be a technical possibility. If and when we do announce further platforms, we want to make sure each version lives up to our standards and expectations. So they're basically saying they are working on an Xbox version. It's not officially announced as coming out, but it sounds like it is in production. And the current reason they haven't announced it seems to boil down to, based on the statement, they can't get the split screen working on Xbox Series S.
Yeah.
Which this sort of opens an interesting can of worms because it's something that has been feared and hasn't come to pass yet, I would say. In the past, we've seen plenty of games release with missing features on Xbox Series S, but it's usually relegated to visual modes. So, for instance, you'll be missing ray tracing, like Doom Eternal got that patch. No ray tracing on Xbox Series S, but you get it on Series X. This is the first time we've heard something specifically related to a gameplay feature that is not working well on the Series S. At least that's what I read into it based on what they're saying here. Which makes sense. Split screen is definitely demanding, right? You're rendering the same version of the world from a different perspective. It's a heavy feature. I can understand why they would be having issues here. My feeling, though, after reading this is, and I'd be curious to see what Series S owners think. I guess the developer doesn't agree with this, but I feel like in cases like this, it should be acceptable to release a version for Xbox Series X with that feature and leave that feature behind on Series S. I'd rather see the Series X be properly utilized, or at least get the game at all, than to just skip the console because, they can't get this feature running acceptably on a different machine, right?
Okay, so what I think you're suggesting here is that this is the developer's choice. And the quote from the article says specifically, we've been unable to get split screen to work to the same standard on both Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S, which is a requirement for us to ship. So yeah, they're suggesting here it's not optional. It's got to be there. It's a requirement. So I think there's two ways you could look at this, right? Either, as you say, it's a requirement defined by the developer itself that this feature has got to be in there. And if it's not in there, they're not going to ship any Xbox version at all, which kind of sounds a bit far-fetched, possibly. I don't know. Now, look, I could be wrong here, but I actually think this is something different. So I think it's actually a technical requirement laid out by the platform holder, in this case, Microsoft. Both Sony and Microsoft have a whole range of technical requirements in order for your machine, in order for your game to be compliant with their hardware. So, yeah, typically both Microsoft and Sony When the enhanced consoles came along, there was a directive that, yes, you could have different visual features on both machines, but the gameplay features, there had to be parity between those two machines. One could not have an advantage over the other in that regard. So yeah, on Series S versus Series X, X typically has more performance modes. It has ray tracing features, which it's not mandatory to bring that stuff over to Xbox Series S. You could ship without it. But split screen co-op, I think, is something different, right? We're talking about a gameplay feature here. And I might be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure this is the case, that with gameplay features, there does have to be parity between Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. I think that's, on balance of probabilities, more likely to be the issue here.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I initially read that as requirement for us to ship as like their own internal requirement, but I suppose it makes more sense that it's actually a Microsoft mandate, in which case I do think it's something that should be reevaluated on a case-by-case basis. Because
but that's the issue, right? Let's say that Larian get a dispensation. It's almost like a papal dispensation to actually ship Baldur's Gate 3 without this feature. Then suddenly there's going to be a whole bunch of developers who might be struggling with Series S features going to Microsoft and saying, hey, if you've let Baldur's Gate go through without split screen, can you let us ship this game without this feature or that feature?
Absolutely agreed. It's like the thin end of a wedge, isn't it? Like I mean, we've seen it before. I mean, not off the top of my head, remember the really arbitrary in the 360 days. They said you could only make a downloadable game for this size. I think Castlevania had to be within 100 megabytes, and then one broke, and then several others were allowed to break over the course of the generation. So I think it's very early in this generation for them to make an exception, but they're going to have to. You're right, this is like the early sign that things are not going to pan out particularly well for Series S. And we're already seeing it like in a load of games, like how far Series S has been held back.
I think, Tom, well, I was going to say your point actually is a perfect example, because there's XBLA games, when they removed that size requirement, they kind of got exponentially better. I think there's not a single person that would argue that that limitation was beneficial for the games themselves. And yes, it did leave some people behind, probably a smaller fraction, but I think it was really important for the service. And I think it's important here to allow this. I think I would say, I mean, I'd be curious to see what the audience thinks, but I would rather have the game ship on Xbox than have it not ship because of this. And I'd rather the Series X, the more powerful machine, receives extra features if available, versus holding it back just because of Series S, right?
Yeah,
but thinking about those technical requirements from the 360 era, man, there were a bunch of them that were broken across the generation. I seem to recall that at launch you had to be native 720p with 2x MSA.
Not true.
Which
they broke that right away.
Exactly, yeah. The requirement was there, but it was removed pretty much from launch. Project Gotham, etc., etc., etc. Then, of course, there was the fact that all games had to be able to run without a hard drive. Towards the end of the generation, that was removed, because we had games like, I think GTA required a hard drive install.
It did, yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of exceptions across the generation, and maybe this will be one of them. I don't know. But I can see why Microsoft would want to hold their ground in the here and now for this, because, they do want to have the Series X and S as being, essentially companion systems, similar to Xbox One S and Xbox One X back in the day, where you can enhance one with visual features, but they've all fundamentally got to have the same gameplay feature set, which actually was also a technical requirement for PS4 and Pro. But in those cases, of course, it was the base system that had the critical mass. And I guess that's interesting as well, because, as far as I'm aware, the split between S and X this generation is essentially 50-50. Tom, what is your solution to this? I mean, my solution would basically be for Microsoft to send in the advanced technology group to help out Larian to see whether they can resolve this issue.
I think that is ultimately the solution, but also I think the way it's been worked out before was to start with Series S as the sort of target and then scale up. much in the same way as we'd use a last gen machine.
It's not viable though, is it? In the world
Not
where
in the long term.
PlayStation 5 has got a 2-to-1 advantage in terms of install base over the Xbox consoles. That's going to be the target platform realistically, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be the depressing solution to the problem.
I think that so far there's actually been quite a fine line being tread with Series S, and I think it's kind of worked. The question is this transition away from visual features to gameplay features. Is that acceptable? I think Microsoft probably think it isn't acceptable, and probably for good reason. But in this case, a split screen mode could be removed from the game, and I'd see that as, well, I guess it is slightly different to like a 60 FPS mode or whatever.
Yeah, I think here's the question to ask yourselves though: would Series S owners rather have this game without split screen, or not have this game at all? Right? If ATG can't come in and help them solve it. And it just comes down to whether they get it or not. I think pretty much everyone would rather just have the game, right, than not have the game.
Yeah,
it's a shame, but I agree.
Well, we're tying ourselves up in knots about this one, which just goes to show how difficult the issue is.
It's tough.
The thing is, though, I think we have to look at what Series S is, and I think what it is actually, in a world of skyrocketing prices where the cost of gaming is shooting up all of the time, Series S is pretty much the singular outlier here to actually offer an affordable way into gaming for the current generation. And I don't think, I do think certain safeguards do need to be put in place. The question is where you draw the line. Do you draw the line at 60 FPS and 120 FPS mode support, or do you draw the line at split screen co-op? Where do you draw the line? I mean, Microsoft has drawn a line, and that's resulting in the situation that we have right here, where right now they can't announce a release date for Baldur's Gate 3 because of the Series S's, the issues they've had in getting split screen working on it. Man, this is a tricky one, right? It is just remarkable, I think, how much gaming technology you're getting with the Series S for the money. And also something which I find really, really interesting and kind of bizarre. Go onto Facebook Marketplace, shop around on Facebook Marketplace. You can get a used Series S for like £100 now.
Yeah, they're really cheap. Yeah,
that is an incredible deal. The used market for it is prices are collapsing. It's quite astonishing. But at the same time, I do think it is, in these economically challenging times, it's the machine of the moment almost. But with that said, obviously, PlayStation continues to sell spades of PlayStation 5s for, whatever it is, $500. Crazy. I'm going to have a final question here. John, where should Microsoft draw the line in terms of feature parity between X and S? That's the key issue here, right?
Yeah, that is difficult. I really think it depends on how important the feature is to the gameplay overall, right? Like,
so it's a case by case basis. You're Microsoft. You're enforcing these technical requirements. You think that the developer should have the leeway to go to Microsoft and say, "Hey, look."
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, again, because you look at a game like It Takes Two, right? That is split screen. It needs to be split screen. It doesn't work without it. Baldur's Gate 3, I'm going to go ahead and say that, at least based on the series history, I don't see how it would drastically change the experience for almost everyone that's going to play it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's a single player game primarily, unless I missed something and it's all about multiplayer now. I hope not. But yeah, I don't know. I understand why they're enforcing these things, and it does make sense to try to maintain that as much as possible. But, I think it's one of those things where they should exhaust every possibility to try to figure this out. And if they really truly can't get there, and Microsoft agrees based on their own aid that they could send to that studio, then I think an exception can be made. But it shouldn't be just like right away, early in development, saying like, oh no, we can't do this feature on Series S. Like, I guess there has to be some development effort put in, even if I guess that could also be a waste of money. I don't know. It really is difficult. I understand why it's a sore spot right now for them.
Tom, where do you draw the line? Where should Microsoft draw the line?
it is again, like much as John said, it's down to the nature of the game. If it's a competitive game, you want a certain feature set. If it's a single player orientated game like this, I think you just focus on the campaign. You deliver the campaign as is, sans split screen if need be for Series S, and so be it. But I think I would kind of just accept it as is if they really can't do it. But then again, I've seen incredible things done. We've seen incredible games come to Switch, which is a very CPU limited system, with a certain type of concerted engineering effort. I believe a lot of things are possible. So yeah, fingers crossed for this one.
Okay. That was quite an involved discussion there, but it really does have profound implications for the generation, I think, if you actually start to remove gameplay features from one of the three consoles. I don't envy the position Microsoft is in here. I mean, on the face of it, a split screen mode could conceivably, maybe let that pass. But if you do that, I do worry that, the amount of appeals from developers about stuff that, they're having trouble with could actually have more serious long-term implications for the Series S, which is, as I said, a machine I think we need. But I guess we'll be following that one as the story develops or doesn't develop. But in the meantime, let's move on to the next news topic. So this week, Nvidia released a widely anticipated feature, which is the ability to use your RTX graphics card, currently RTX 3000 or 4000, to implement on-the-fly AI upscaling to videos that sit within the Edge and Chrome browsers. It's called RTX Video Enhancement Super Resolution. Yeah, I've installed it. It's available as an option that you select within the control panel. There seems to be 4 quality modes here, and I believe there was a requirement or a suggestion that to use the top quality level 4 enhancement, you'd need a 70 class GPU or better.
Crikey.
Yeah, it seems to have quite a requirement, as it were.
Level 4.
Level 4.
I like this.
Level
Sounds
4
like
video. Yeah, sort of Blade Runner level 4 video enhancement. John, now we were really eagerly anticipating this, but I think it's fair to say that the actual quality is possibly not the game changer that we were expecting.
Quite the opposite, at least based on some of the examples I've seen so far, where it actually seems to be reducing the level of detail in a scene. It doesn't look great to my eyes at this point, so I don't know. I mean, I don't really see any use for it at this point, although it does seem to vary a lot with content. Sometimes filmed content seemed to look okay, but then like you tried it on the DF Direct and it did not look very good at all, right?
It looks very smudged.
Yeah, that sort of AI smudgy look to it, where it just overly filtered and aggressive. It's, to me, what I've seen so far, it looks like the type of thing that you would enable on a TV, buried deep in the menu, like picture enhance extreme mode. You turn that to on, and now everything looks bad, but it's being sold as a feature. Like, that's kind of the impression I got from it.
It's funny, the first thing I tested, and it was actually brought up by the supporters as well, is the classic Need for Speed comparison between PlayStation 3 and PlayStation Vita, which was mastered at 720p, of course, because it was the 720p generation. And it does something. It seems to do some macro block suppression. But, if you watched one after the other, or indeed side by side, you probably wouldn't really be able to tell much of a difference. And this was on full level 4 processing.
Level 4
processing. Enhance. It just didn't enhance, really. So I guess the applications of it are probably going to be quite limited. I also found, I was watching a YouTube video at 2 times speed. And I was also exporting a video from Adobe Premiere, and there was a contention for GPU resources there, which saw the video running more choppily. So there's a bunch of limitations here. I don't think the case has quite been made for the quality of it. but a lot of people want to know what we think about it. I think you've got to really test it across a broad range of content. You've got to figure out what these 4 quality levels were. I mean, I just went straight to level 4, right? Because, the Spinal Tap equivalent of going to 11. But it still didn't seem to be a game-changing proposition. The other thing I think I've noted somewhere is that the actual effectiveness of it depends on the size of the video window. If the video window within your browser is too small, then it just doesn't engage at all. And why should it? Because it's probably going to be super sampled anyway, depending on the size of the window. But I was running it in full 4K, right? I tested a bunch of content from 720p up to 4K. It doesn't do anything on anything less than 360p, so you've got to start at 360p content to see anything happening at all. Which unfortunately ruled out the original Chad Warden video, John.
Oh, dang it!
What a missed opportunity.
We were waiting for, yeah.
Very frustrating. I think the opportunity there to, upscale and improve really low resolution content like that, 360p, is probably one of the key things I'd want out of it. So that's a bit of a shame, but yeah.
So this seems to have a similar problem to a lot of other of the NVIDIA's tools for presenting content, such as the voice
right,
stuff
great
and the
idea
eyeball
in theory.
stuff and the the NVIDIA camera stuff. All of those features are interesting on the face of it, and if you actually test them in certain scenarios, they work extremely well. The problem I found thus far is that you can't count on them. They will either not work well, they'll reduce the quality, they'll cause glitches. You can't trust it. We've certainly experienced a lot of that with RTX voice when trying that, because it does actually do a fantastic job with noise removal. It's really good, except when it's not. And that's the problem, is like when you're recording, like say DF Direct Weekly like this, if we would use it, sometimes it works great, but other times it causes weird popping, it causes voice dropouts, it causes noise. And there's no way to predict how or why it's going to happen, when it's going to happen. And as a result, you can't rely on it at all. And that is fundamentally the problem with all of this stuff. I mean, I guess with this video AI upscaler, it's not so much about creating content, it's more about consuming content. But even then, if you just enable this all the time, you don't know whether it's actually going to be helping or hurting for video. And that is very frustrating.
I think in terms of these AI tools, perhaps Nvidia has almost set itself up for these fails because DLSS is so good.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything is going to be compared to DLSS, even DLSS 3, right? And, that was a game-changing piece of technology, which, basically required AMD and Intel to produce their own competing technologies. It was that good. So when something comes along which is good in some scenarios but not in others, doesn't have that same game-changing effect, there's an inevitable sort of level of disappointment to it. But I'm wondering, I have to admit, based on their preview materials that went out, it seemed to be doing a lot more than what it does in my own testing.
Yeah, that initial trailer looked incredible. Really incredible.
Well, it looks useful and interesting, I'd say. And but I'm not, I'm looking at my control panel now, and the RTX video enhancement setting is off, and it will probably remain there until there's like changes or I find out where it actually makes a difference. I tried it on Deep Space Nine content from Netflix and YouTube. Because there is no HD version of that, and the Netflix versions are really, really crappy. But it, you basically removed some macro blocking, but it didn't really improve my enjoyment of the show in any way, which is kind of the point, right? Okay, well, I guess we've ruled that one out then.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the next news topic. So, John, you talked about this last week in our State of Play commentary, where one of the shining lights of the whole show was a small game from the developers of Tetris Effect and Res Infinite, I guess. They've come out with a new game. There's a demo out now, Humanity. The demo means we've been able to go hands-on. And I'd quite like your impressions on this. I think we've all played it. It is the Lemmings game that we've been waiting for, the 3D Lemmings game we've been waiting for, right?
Kind of, yeah. So it has elements of Lemmings for sure. The idea being that you're guiding sort of like entities around through a stage to reach the end point. But it also reminded me of Choo Choo Rocket in a good way, because like in Choo Choo Rocket, I believe the mice they basically are infinite. I think it's either like a timer. I forget what the objective is in terms of winning that each one, but the humans in this game keep flowing almost like water, right? There's not a finite number of them like in Lemmings where you have to rescue, X number of the total. So here it's more about figuring out how do you get that stream of people from one end of the level to the other. And you control like a small dog character in a platformer like way. And similar to Choo Choo Rocket, you're dropping arrows on the ground to direct the traffic, while also gaining additional powers such as that you can apply to them. Like if you place certain pads, you can reduce the gravity of the humans or cause them to do like sort of a super jump. You can also dive into them and like flow through them yourself to get up into different areas. It's a really slick idea and it works really well. And it's also kind of visually neat. It's this very like, sort of simplistic design, I would say, but like with the tight style and like seeing all those moving people all casting shadows and individually animating. It's a neat tech demo-y looking thing. But I tried it in PSVR 2 mode, which is both amazing and not perfect at the same time. So basically, unlike the 2D mode, it becomes like this little like floating diorama. And there's two modes, one that kind of moves the camera as you move the character around, which I think might cause motion sickness for some people. And then there's another where it sort of stays still and you can basically walk around the tower in a 3D space, like a room scale kind of thing. And that felt amazing to me, I thought, controlling the little creature, little dog entity while maneuvering these humans. The problem with the PSVR 2 mode is right now it's like weirdly low resolution, like very chunky visuals in VR, and it's only 60 FPS. My guess is that all those individual humans are eating up some resources, probably heavy on compute or something like that. That is potentially limiting what the game can do in VR. Because other than that, it's fairly simple visually. But
does it not have the time warp to 120?
I think it does for the head. It's just that when you're moving, everything else moving in the scene, it's just 60, which is, not uncommon for it. But yeah, like it's a neat thing. It's got a cool presentation. It's very promising, and I'm eager to play more.
Did you play it, Tom?
Yeah, actually, I had a go with about 4 or 5 levels.
Nice.
Just it was captivating. Really is. I like simple but perfectly executed ideas, and I think coming off Tetris Effect, kind of, it really carried on that momentum. But this is a great idea. I definitely saw the parallels with Choo Choo Rocket right away, John.
That's good.
A bit more of a slightly darker version of it because there's people involved.
Yeah.
But it ran beautifully. I was playing on PS5, and what I really loved at the end of a level, especially a big sort of stage, you almost end up with a beautiful pattern of humans kind of flowing over one, and then like an arc over a bridge, and then going under. It's like a highway. It's really impressive. Not much to say on this one, but very stunning.
Well, it is slightly sinister to see these people just jumping off into oblivion en masse.
Yeah, I'm curious to see where because the trailer showed stuff like facing off against low polygon monochrome figures that were also like similarly flowing. So I'm curious to see where they go with all that. But that's kind of the thing with Mizuguchi games, is they kind of have this surreal synesthesia, of course, kind of design, and this does carry that. It's not as quote unquote groovy as those games. It's not focused on sort of pop music and that kind of thing. It's much more dreamlike, but the atmosphere is definitely captivating and it feels pretty original. And it's the first time, at least I've personally played a game that's Lemmings-ish like, but in 3D, because Lemmings 3D exists, or 3D Lemmings, however you want to call it, and it's pretty bad. Mainly because the controls it makes it almost unplayable. It's extremely complex in terms of camera movement, and I actually think having a finite number of characters in a 3D game like this would be very annoying, just as it was in 3D Lemmings, because it takes longer to orient yourself and figure out where to place the next thing, whereas you can instantly figure that out in 2D in the original Lemmings games. So I think this more like Choo Choo Rocket style design works better here. But yeah.
Okay, good stuff. Well, we look forward to seeing more on this game. And with the absence of Alex, John, kudos for getting in a quote unquote.
Oh yes, that's true. I had to do that.
Let's move on to the next news topic. So a new PRB emerged this week for Final Fantasy 16. A bunch of press, not including us, were invited to take a look at the game of, well, Final Fantasy 16, if we're talking specifically. And yeah, I mean, this is looking fantastic. And there's been a number of news stories surrounding the game as well. One of which is that although the game has a 6-month exclusivity window for PlayStation 5, we shouldn't be expecting to see a PC version anytime soon. But let's first of all talk about the footage that was disseminated by Square Enix to various outlets. Tom, thoughts?
Well, I'm very excited for this one. It's kind of like almost a complete redesign of what Final Fantasy is, and that has been to an extent what Final Fantasy's mindset has been with every release. I guess past 9, it's been very different from that point onwards. Very excited. I understand that one of the key developers behind Devil May Cry is behind the combat, and you can see that reflected in just how varied the moveset is, how like it sort of tactile everything is. So very excited. I'm sure there's lots of people who wanted to go back to turn-based, but no, this is a good move, I think, a good forward-thinking move. And I guess the other point is that there seems to be some traces of, I'm sure you noticed this, John, like influences from Dark Souls, and kind of at least in the sort of area we have footage of earlier on, it's sort of like a classic Dark Souls style castle area. I wonder if there's some influence there, like Squaresoft decided this is the way things are going in the RPG space, so let's take this way.
It's hard to say, how they were influenced. I can definitely see it's taking a different tone compared to most, but not all Final Fantasy games.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a little Matsuno, I guess, but a little darker than that. Final Fantasy 14 itself, which has connections to this game in terms of development staff, also is generally more serious, though a little goofier only because of the fact that it's multiplayer and but yeah, I really like the look of this. It's come a long way since that initial trailer. The visuals look fantastic. Characters, materials, it's all extremely well done. The lighting is superb. This is light years beyond Forspoken in terms of visual quality. So I don't think they've ever actually confirmed specifically which engine or like which technology they're using. There's just been a suggestion that it's derived from some of the work done on FF14 and then sort of spun out into its own thing from there. It does not seem to use Luminous. It doesn't use Unreal, nothing like that, which is interesting because it does have kind of its own look. And the thing it reminded me the most of visually, actually, though, is the Demon Souls remake, right? In terms of just the environment detail and how dense everything is. Like, even though it's just sort of a stony castle area, like, you're not seeing many flat surfaces, right? It's all this like cobbled, creaky looking old stonework everywhere and gravel, and everything is like really detailed and undulated. It's very nice and it feels great. But based on other trailers, we also know it's not all going to be set in this sort of dark dungeony area either, right? There are other spaces within the world. I really have to wonder if there is some influence from God of War 2018 in here as well. Because the character action with sort of your companion that you're commanding around kind of reminded me a little bit of that, though obviously the storytelling here looks very different and in a good way. So I'm very curious to see where that goes as well. But I'm extremely excited for this because it looks like it's really going to attempt to bring back mainline Final Fantasy again in a new, interesting way, which is what I always hoped from Final Fantasy with each new release.
Yeah, I'm reading this comments about the PC version from Yoshida, and wow, man, this is a long comment about why we shouldn't expect to see a PC version anytime soon. In fact, I'm going to read it. First of all, it is true that Final Fantasy XVI is a 6-month limited time exclusive on the PlayStation 5 platform. However, it's a completely different story that the PC version will be released in half a year. I will make it clear, but the PC version will not come out in half a year. This is because we spent a lot of time and money optimizing the PS5 platform to deliver the best gaming experience. Of course, I would like to release a PC version at some point so that everyone can play as many games as possible. However, even if we start optimizing the PC version after the PS5 version comes out, we won't be able to optimize it in half a year. So it won't come out in a short span of half a year. Oof. I would like to release it eventually, and I think I will, but I am not at the stage where I can say when. So he continues. Let him finish, John.
Okay.
First of all, I would be happy if you could play the PS5 version, which I made with the thought of being the best game in the world. If the PC version comes out in half a year, I can quit the company. Ha ha ha. Please don't say I won't buy the PS5 version because the PC version will be released in half a year. This is actually a really interesting comment, I think, John. First of all, bearing in mind what happened with Final Fantasy VII Remake on PC, there's the sense here that, you know, there's a certain bar of quality and level of optimization that is required before he's going to ship the game. That means, first of all, that the focus is firmly on PlayStation 5, which is, you know, as it should be. Mm-hmm. But then there's also the hint that, you know, come on, if we're going to get a PC version out, it can't be rushed. It's the right way forward, isn't it?
I agree. And I think, you know, Final Fantasy XIV itself has a large install base on PC as well, right? And Yoshida is involved with that. I think in this case, they really want to avoid a bad PC release. And it sounds like he's pretty much confirming that there will be one at some point. Just we don't know when.
Just don't think it's going to appear in 6 months.
Yeah, the way he kept reiterating that makes it seem like he's been harassed constantly on social media or on a message board somewhere about this, and he's just sick and tired of reading it and had to just drive the stake in, like, guys, no, it is not coming in half a year, stop it. So I did appreciate that sort of tone he has there, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's coming to PC at some point, and it'll probably be, and I really think and I hope that Square has learned some lessons from other recent PC releases. Well, the Final Fantasy VII Remake was pretty poor, but the ways it is poor, I would say, if you look at it, is actually pretty consistent with most Unreal Engine games, so it's kind of hard to blame them entirely. Like, we've started to see some progress made on that front, but
there was never, as far as I know, John, there was never a fix. I mean, you know, we gave Callisto Protocol a hard time, but, you know, they put in a shader compilation step within, you know, days.
Yeah. But there's been plenty of Unreal games that haven't been fixed, right? Like, it's not absolutely like everybody has solved these problems. Forspoken, I would say, had a better PC version, but with some weirdness, like the certain features not working correctly. But it was definitely, I would say, a much better place to play than on PlayStation 5. But the key I get from this footage here versus any of the Forspoken footage pre-release is that this is running very consistently, and it's 30 frames per second, but with very nice motion blur. It's very stable. There's no frame time inconsistencies. Everything just looks exactly as it should. So you really get the impression that they're polishing the heck out of this game. And, you know, there's rumors out there that the game's basically been done since like last summer or something like that, right? So if any of that is true, and I don't know, one way or another, then it suggests that perhaps they've had a long time to just polish the heck out of this version, which is what it really needs. Like, if this comes out day one on a disc, even just polished, no patches necessary, that will be a huge win, I think.
Well, I'm reading this comment from Yoshida on Polygon, which made me chuckle. I know Final Fantasy games can get delayed at the last minute, but unless a meteor falls on Japan, there will be no delay.
Gosh, he's amazing, Yoshida. What a personality. I love this guy.
Thing is, you know, I don't know. I really do hope at this point that a meteor doesn't fall on Japan, or at any point for that matter.
There's always a chance, but let's just hope not. It sounds great. I mean, personally speaking, the whole idea that this game is done and dusted mostly, and they're just on the home stretch, fills me with a lot of confidence for a good release. We've had a couple of releases recently which really needed day one patches, and maybe this one will as well. But it seems like they're pretty confident about it. Also, being a PS5 focused development project, gosh, that fills me with so much confidence as well. How often do you see a game made for just one console, one platform, without any other insight? It's
Man,
quite
it
on this scale of this
it used to
budget
be
as
the
well.
norm though. That's the thing. Like that, there was a time when that was all the big games were
Yeah,
like that, right? And then just in recent years, I mean, in the last decade or more, that kind of has dried up. We just don't see it very often, especially from third parties. And I get that a lot of that comes down to just the cost of development is so high. Like, unless you have some kind of special deal with the first party publisher, it doesn't make sense to limit yourself to one platform. So,
exactly.
Sorry,
uh,
I'm still chuckling about that comment. Unless a meteor falls on Japan, there will be no delay. I just like the way that, a game delay would require an extinction level event to
I
not make this
I
launch.
just love how open he is about it. Like a lot of, he's just throwing stuff out there. Some of the things he says, while I'm sure they were run through the PR pass, they feel almost like a comment that was done without the PR pass. You know what I mean? Where it's very bold and like you kind of head turning where you're like, wow, really? Okay, that's cool. It's very confident to say things like that. And that's
Absolutely.
great.
Let's move on to our final news topic of the week, and it's a topic that is closely related, actually, because Square Enix has announced that Luminous Productions, who have recently produced Forspoken, they're going to be merging into Square Enix, which is an interesting comment to make because, as I understand it, the developer is already situated within Square Enix.
Yeah.
I don't know, John. What do you make of this?
It sounds to me like they're unhappy with the performance of Forspoken and have decided, you know what, maybe we don't need to be doing this anymore. And I assume that they'll pull them back in. Luminous may never be used again. The people working on that team will likely go elsewhere. Like, I think it's just like, well, we don't want to let these people go, which is good. And there's a lot of talent in there, but let's bring them back into the company and figure out what's next.
I took it that way as well. That
Yeah.
is sort of what they call in the business space sundowning,
Yeah, a
like
little
a
bit.
venture. But it's in the nicest way. I agree. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's in the name of the production company. The Luminous engine was tied to what they're about, and I don't think that's the way forward anymore for Square Enix. It's Unreal mostly from here onwards, with the exception of Final Fantasy 16, I guess. But it's a shame because they had a stab at something, a unique IP. It didn't pan out critically, and it doesn't seem like it's set the world on fire. They're making a DLC, is what we're reading here, and that seems to be their last sort of push for the
DLC.
game.
Yeah.
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 It's a shame because the Luminous engine seemed so promising in Final Fantasy 15. It was really beautiful for
Yeah.
the time. I think Forspoken still looks significantly worse than Final Fantasy 15. A lot of the decisions they made with the visuals are absolutely puzzling. And I feel like to get Luminous back on track to compete with any of the other major engines would require far more development time and money than they are willing to put into it, and for good reason. So I'm sad to see potentially, I mean, it's not confirmed, let's not get ahead of ourselves here, but potentially this could be the end of another unique engine fork or another engine thing, right? Completely. So, and Unreal's domination continues.
Well, that assumes that, yeah, I mean, obviously Square Enix do use Unreal Engine 4. However, Final Fantasy 16 doesn't.
Yeah,
So,
but the next Kingdom Hearts uses the UE5 and you know, Final Fantasy 7 remake part 2, I forget the name now, the Rebirth or something. That is Unreal Engine, of course. So it seems to be their main focus for now, and that's fine.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of their Switch JRPGs, like Octopath, seems to be Unreal as well. So it scales up and down.
I would say that the team that's working on Final Fantasy 16 plus those involved in Final Fantasy 14 will probably continue to utilize their own technology based on what we're seeing here. And it seems like good technology, so it's great. I mean, building something like FF14 in Unreal seems possible, but I would imagine it's quite difficult. I mean, how many really successful big MMOs have we seen with Unreal Engine? Can you guys think of any?
No, not off the top of my head. Then again, how many really successful MMOs are left
Yeah,
at the moment?
there's not many, but
Yeah, very
that's
slim
true.
pickings there.
Yeah, that's true.
I just think the concept that Final Fantasy XIV has achieved the success it has been phenomenal. I think it's quite, a massive success story.
Yeah, it's truly
Never saw it
awe-inspiring.
coming based on the troubled beginnings, but it's come into its own.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the biggest comeback stories in the industry's history, I think. I mean, to beat a juggernaut like WoW, it's just,
I mean, that's what
who'd have seen it coming?
that's why Yoshida's become a bit of a rock star, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, that was probably one of the biggest saves in the history of the company. That's an incredible feat to get that back on track.
And right now, it's like a real feather in their cap. It's like the biggest thing they've got.
It's literally the only MMO RPG I've ever considered playing. Haven't
Yeah,
still
but
played
you're not
it.
playing it though, are you?
I'm not playing it because of the time requirements, but it's the only one I ever looked at and say, I could see myself playing that. Whereas
Same
when I look
here.
at WoW, I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, this looks dumb. I will never play this game. And I have never played WoW. And I think I don't want to get myself in trouble with the fans, but let's just say
No,
that's
but
not
no.
the type of game for me.
I mean,
Wow.
we're both big Final Fantasy fans, right? And 14 is like the one I am personally holding off on because it's an MMO, it's that style, but
yeah.
I know there's quality in there.
I feel like I'm missing out on something, right? Like
Same,
there's something
yeah.
there that looks really interesting. The music's amazing. Like there's a lot of good stuff in there. Just man, the time requirement to see it all.
Maybe we could set us like a month block off and just say, let's just go for it.
I'm sure Rich would love that.
Yeah. This is an amazing business case you laid out there.
A month of Final Fantasy 14. Every video is Final Fantasy 14.
Wow.
It's gonna be numbers in that.
Big numbers.
Okay, so that is the news for the week. Let's crack on with supporter Q&A. This is the area of the show where every week we ask our supporters to come up with a big bunch of questions for us to answer, and we choose the best, or rather the ones that we're actually equipped to answer, because there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. We're going to start with this question from Tony Escobar. What are your thoughts on the Pokémon and Chrono Cross patches? Do they save the games? So these are two titles which had contentious beginnings. And I'll tackle the Pokemon stuff because Oliver has actually, he did the review, wasn't too happy with the technical performance of the game. And, this, along with other titles, he's been keeping an eye on them, right? But he says that the new Pokemon patch doesn't do anything for the performance. The best way to improve performance is seemingly to restart the game every hour.
Wow.
Which is the same as launch. So yeah, there's no real progress to talk about there. Chrono Cross, has anybody looked at the patch for that recently? Has it changed the game or improved it in any way?
I haven't had a chance, honestly. I mean, the state we left it in was pretty dire, worse than the PlayStation 1 performance on a PS5. So that's
Yeah, that
where we
wasn't
left
great,
it.
was it?
It was, I think, it was because it was using a form of emulation. It's fairly safe to say it was just emulating the original frame rate cap, and so you got like 15 frames per second at points. But why it was even lower on the PS5 in the first place after that is kind of beyond me. So I like the team must have just seen the coverage, and well, I'm amazed they released it in that state in the first place. But yeah, I think
Okay.
speaks for
I think
itself.
to answer Tony's question, we haven't looked at Chrono Cross, but Pokemon.
I have been browsing footage of Chrono Cross, and it looks significantly better. In fact, a lot of the footage I've seen shows the battles even updating at 60 frames per second now.
Wow.
Which I did not expect. So it,
Hush
really,
the war, please.
it seems
Yeah.
like they've done some serious work on this thing. It looks a lot better. So I'm
What
actually
do you reckon?
curious to check it out now, just to see, like, is this really like that different? Because it looks like they've done
Yeah.
a ton of work on it.
Now,
So-
I've got a couple of thoughts on the go-to problem with emulating Chrono Cross at higher frame rates has been related to affecting the game logic.
Right.
There's been a couple of attempts at it, and it affected the animations in some way. So maybe they found a workaround for that, and everything's great.
Yeah, I'm
But yeah,
curious because looking at footage here, it looks like the overworld stuff on the map is still just capped at 30 frames per second.
interesting.
So, while the battles, though, the thing about the battles in Chrono Cross, if you remember, if you played it on an original PlayStation, I
Yeah.
feel like at times when it would fade into the battle screen, you'd actually see pockets of it hitting 60 FPS for like, a couple seconds before it started
You're right. Yeah.
drawing the characters. So like
Yeah.
it felt like the battles were probably unlocked on real PS1 hardware and they just couldn't actually get up to 60 except for when it's completely empty, right? So I think that was kind of possibly baked in for the battle stuff.
It's
I don't know.
quite likely. Also, another twist with Chrono Cross is uniquely that it's got a fast forward and slow down feature where you can kind of speed up your movement to get from A to B and speed up the battles. So,
Oh, I wonder if that actually has any influence.
yeah, me
I
too.
need to look. I need to look at it closely myself. This is all this tentative based on watching videos of people because I did not purchase this because of the original state of the release. So, but I am curious now to see more.
Okay. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Padster. A pretty quick one, I think. Hi, DF team. Is there a searchable database or spreadsheet for Alex's optimized settings he lays out in his tech analysis of games? It would be very useful to be able to quickly find the optimized settings for older games without having to re-watch the whole video. And Padster, you're entirely right. And it's something we've talked about with our friends at Eurogamer to actually figure out a mechanism for making this happen. I think we can do something on our side to make it easier. But the short answer is no, there isn't. But we're hoping to change that situation soon. It's difficult because obviously it's not something you can specifically template because every game has different settings. And yeah, it's a bit tricky, but it's certainly something we want to do. The issue being that, with each passing month, there's a whole bunch of new games where we have optimized settings. And so the task of going back and databasing all of the prior ones becomes larger. But it's something we do want to address. We'll move on to the next question. This one from Big Man Upstairs.
Oh yeah.
Hello, DFers! Exclamation point. With so many games coming in hot that require a large patch on launch day, plus subsequent patches over the weeks that follow the release, do you think the consumer trust is slowly eroding away and that we'll start to see more gamers holding off with day one purchases? Interesting question, right, John? Because, man, there have been a bunch of games that just have shipped with issues. I guess if there is a day one patch that actually does the bulk of the job in addressing issues, I don't think it's going to shift the needle in terms of consumer trust because they never get to see the day zero experience or that's the bottom line. John, thoughts?
I think consumers are getting used to this stuff, and I think, as you
Yes.
say, if things are fixed like at launch or within a day or so, I think most people are fine with that. I don't like it because it usually means that you're missing something on the disc, right? But it's not actually as wide of a problem as you think. It's just happened with some pretty high profile releases. The problem is more that when you have a game that ships with issues and then it takes a long time to fix those issues, whether that's weeks or even months, that kind of thing does erode some trust and it creates sort of this negative feeling around the company. And I think that does impact consumers and they become more aware of that problem. I still think, man, Nintendo's approach to releasing games is so interesting to me because usually when a Nintendo game is released, not only is it very solid at launch, but as everyone knows, they don't really drop prices very often or by very much. And so they've sort of trained, Nintendo fans to be like, well, I may as well just get this right away because I won't see a price drop for years, if at all. So then they go for it. Whereas with other modern games, I think it's created this situation where consumers see, oh, game X released and it's really buggy. I may as well just wait for a sale. You know what I mean? And then by the time it's on sale, I'll have a patched version. And I suspect that does influence people at large. And it's something that these companies really only have themselves to blame for, right? Because, releasing unfinished games and then putting them on clearance 6 months later.
Exactly.
And we see that all over the place. It's constantly happening. Game prices just drop. The exception of stuff like Call of Duty games don't really go on sale very often, for instance. Especially like the older ones. If you look on PC, for instance, like all the classic ones going back like 10 years even, you rarely see them go on sale. And when they do, it's not by that much. So they've managed to retain their value. But most games, Ubisoft stuff especially, is real guilty of this. They drop steeply, really fast, and are often very buggy at launch. So what's the incentive to buy right away for most people?
Yeah.
Not that much.
Yeah, I think I mean, you've touched on the cost side of it, but then there's also, and I totally agree, like, it's the value proposition of it. But then you've got to like think why people are buying at launch. They want to experience the game in line with other people. They want to be part of the conversation. But if you can get over that, if you can just say, "I'll wait 2, 3 months, 4, 5 months, maybe a year to play Cyberpunk," for example, then you're getting a way better, end product, and there's not really much lost. I've certainly like taken that mentality myself, where I just don't play well outside of work anyway. Anyway, I just have to play these games sometimes. But I've missed. I put off playing Cyberpunk because I know, now it's way better and I can play and enjoy it now properly. I put off playing another game I think recently, Sonic Origins at launch. Just because I knew, well, there's a boxed edition coming out and that'll probably have the updates and be fixed up. So, yeah, I do think
That's hilarious.
People
Tom.
understand.
The idea of it's like, well, these games have been out for like 30 years, and they come out. I'm just gonna wait even further for the fixed version of these 30-year-old games. It just
Or go back to the Mega
really
Drive
funny.
version.
That's really funny.
No, it is. I do want to play that game, like just because, but it's a. So it's about how much do you trust you put in developers these days to get it right day one. And to be honest, I think people have acclimatized to the situation that most games are released as almost games as a service-esque products, and you just get rolling updates to even single-player games where, previously it would have been just one and done. You release it on a disc or cartridge in the 90s and early 2000s, and that'd be it.
I will say that's why you got to give kudos to something like God of War Ragnarok, even though it didn't blow our socks off in terms of visual quality, though it does look good. The game they released was extremely polished at launch. It just came out, it was solid, it did exactly what it was supposed to do. That should be the norm, but sadly it is not.
I guess it really takes an example like Cyberpunk to put people off, though.
Oh yeah, but even then, that game continues to sell. People watch all the videos.
Yeah, because some might say it's because it's fixed.
Yeah, I'm sure that it did a lot of damage to them, but it doesn't seem like the damage has stuck, and people are like mostly forgiving now. Like, wow, that was a mess. Now I can enjoy it.
Yeah, it is a tricky one. I mean, in an ideal world, the games would just launch finished and proper, which was kind of like how things had to be in the past when you were like baking your code onto cartridges. But right now, when you've got the opportunity to update your code as and when you please, it's just generated a completely different production mindset, really. Okay, let's move on to the next question. This one from Abhi. With remakes like Dead Space PS5, T-Lu PS5, Demon's Souls PS5, is this the best time to remake games with the lofty targets that developers had at the time of 7th gen? It's been discussed before that developers had maybe too high of targets for simulation and dynamic lighting and shadows. Wow, this is an interesting one, right? I think the main issue with the 7th gen is just that, yes, there was that ambition, but there was also really poor performance across the board, across a whole bunch of games.
Yeah.
Tom, thoughts on this one? Are there any other 7th gen titles that we should be revisiting now we've actually got the hardware power to deliver them?
Maybe Metal Gear Solid 4. That'd be good to have back in the updated today. I'm struggling to think of games that, and I'm sure there are games that were on the level of The Last of Us and Demon's Souls, because those two had not great performance. They were really pushing on. The Last of Us especially was pushing pretty hard that PS3, and so that was kind of justifiable in that sense to see it updated. But what else delved like really low? Like like 20 FPS or lower, but still had this high ambition?
Oh, I
Trying
mean,
to think.
I think the most obvious answer here is it's Bullet Witch. If you remember
Bullet
that
Witch.
on the 360, that game, it's one of the best games ever made. Okay, no, not really, but it is interesting, and Bullet Witch does not run well. A lot of those early 360 titles like that have extremely poor performance. Or a late game like Drakengard 3, Dragoon 3, if you remember that.
I remember
That's
that.
one
Yeah.
of the worst performing games I've seen on the PS Triple. It is extremely bad, and it's kind of locked to that system. Only emulation can save it, basically.
I
But
think the issue here is it's not just about performance, is it? It's about lofty ambitions that
yeah. But
are
most
actually being realized with the current generation. I mean, you look at Demon Souls on PS3, even if it ran at 30 frames per second, it still wouldn't be the same experience as Demon Souls on PS5, which was a proper, similar to Dead Space, a total revamp, right? So I guess the question is of titles from the Xbox 360 and PS3 generations that would benefit from
I,
that sort of
I think
revamp.
most of the ambitious games though pulled it off pretty well. Like Naughty Dog
Yeah,
stuff,
I'd
for
say.
instance, the Gears games, like they really delivered good experiences back then, unlike a lot of the majority of stuff. So
So yeah, I do think that the last one is, as I say, Metal Gear Solid 4, one of the huge games that we've not really seen a revival of.
that
And
that
that game,
that needs that needs a lot of work, I would say.
Yeah,
it
can
does.
we
Yeah.
revamp the story and the cutscenes
Can
at
you
the same
revamp
time?
Yes.
just redo it all, remake everything, and change
Please.
it?
Man,
Yeah,
I don't know. I think there is an argument for a revamp of certain franchises. I mean, we've been talking about it for years, but Assassin's Creed, if Assassin's Creed was made today with the same mindset that the original, first couple of titles were created back in the Xbox 360 generation, that level of staggering ambition they had for that game back then moved over to the current generation, we wouldn't be talking about Assassin's Creed Valhalla. We'd be talking about something which is very, very different,
I
right?
I don't think Ubisoft has the potential to create something like that anymore.
You don't?
They, I think they have the talent, but I think the leadership just isn't there for that type of thing. They're just there to. They've completely shifted. Ubisoft used to be about sort of pushing boundaries and creating really interesting ideas and realizing those ideas, and that's just kind of faded. Like once we get into that generation, everything just turned into, I don't know, it feels like it's almost exploiting the consumer base.
Yeah.
Like we must get popular thing into things so that numbers go up and people play and buy product, rather than like here's a creative work that feels truly inspired, like this original. Assassin's Creed 1 is very flawed, but it was super interesting conceptually, very ambitious from a design. And when was the last time Ubisoft produced a game that had that kind of, you know, design to it? You guys think of anything?
Not off the top of my head, no.
Watch Dogs felt like their last attempt at something like that.
Rainbow
Right.
Six Siege was really interesting.
It is good. I would say Siege
Yeah.
is pretty good, but that's also back from like that era, right? It's
Yeah,
a long
it
time ago
is.
now.
Mm.
They've just been very rote, just doing the same thing over and over and over again. And yeah, I miss that. That's a shame.
I guess what's been tricky is that, that particular era, there was so much new IP going around with so much
Yeah.
ambition being poured into it. It doesn't seem to be taking this time around. It's very difficult to find new games that are actually finding traction.
So expensive to make, and if they fail, you're in deep trouble, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Lucas Velichka. Hello, do you think this console generation will be longer than the typical 7 years? Thank you for your brilliant content.
Yes.
Tom,
Sorry.
dive straight in there, John. You think it'll be longer than 7 years?
Tom, go for it. Actually, I think so. But
I'm reasonably sure it'll be 7. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's going to be extended generation, given how long it's taken to get started. It feels like if this was like a race and we were like going up the gears on a manual stick, it would have been. We're still in gear 2.
Yeah, I agree.
2 years in, it's just, yeah, it's taken a while, and we're not going to get to top gear anytime soon.
I mean, outside of a few exceptions, maybe I'm the only one, but I kind of feel like these consoles are like the PS4 Pro and the Xbox One double X. You know what I mean? Where it's like this is just continuing last gen. I haven't really
Right.
felt that much in terms of like real shift visually or like pushing to new levels outside of again just a handful of titles. And I think we're bumping up more against just the realities of modern game development and just the sheer investment time, and it's venturing into a pretty scary place in that regard. So I think just getting something made, especially if you want that level of quality, it just takes a long time. It's not really feasible to do it in a way that how generations typically operated in the past.
Right. I think there's two ways we can look at this. First of all, if we're going to stay wedded to the concept of a console generation, it probably will be a long one, simply because the concept of coming up with a new machine that is at least twice as powerful as the current one is proving to be exceptionally difficult, especially with the rising costs of semiconductors, etc. I think there's two ways you can look at this console generation. This one, it seems to me that there are key things that have been addressed. We now have a decent CPU, but even there we're finding limitations already. We have a decent GPU. Crucially, the storage issue has finally been addressed. These are all vectors that developers can use to actually, get a really decent generation of games out of this particular hardware. But what if the console generation as we know it is over, right? What if it is just iterative upgrades every 4 or so years? Let's say, we're talking about Xbox Series S and X. Let's say there's a new Xbox that comes along that, gracefully retires the Series S, and, the X becomes the power, the power level for the entry level. So you would be looking at more of a mobile phone style thing. It's quite interesting. I was thinking back to when I went to Microsoft to look at the Xbox One X, and before I actually saw the hardware, I had a pitch from Mike Ybarra at the time. He was there, and he was talking about the concept that gamers, similar to owners of mobile phones, would want, more immediate access to better technology. And that was kind of raising questions to me that, well, maybe we are going to be moving away from console generations and we're going to be moving more into a iterative upgrade period. And then there was the whole cross-gen thing with Xbox. They were completely open about it. Our games will be appearing on both systems. So I do wonder whether Microsoft are already laying the ground for this sort of more gradual transition as opposed to hard and fast generations, which was completely the opposite approach advocated by Mark Cerny and the during the PlayStation 5 run up to launch. But in actual fact, they kind of ended up following the same strategy. There was a couple of years of cross-gen there. I don't know.
It kind of feels like they changed strategy because early on there was a surprising amount of PS5 exclusive stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like you had some of the launch games, you had Returnal, you had Ratchet, stuff like that. And then they kind of regressed back to cross-gen, which makes me think that they got cold feet and changed their mind.
Possibly. Did they, though? Because, Gran Turismo 7 was clearly a cross-gen title.
Yeah.
God of War was clearly a cross-gen title.
Maybe you're right. I suspect, I'm sure those were always intended. It's just interesting how they didn't seem to have much in the way of new console exclusives, basically.
Yeah, we would have seen the ripple effect of early project startups, like right when the console was launched. We'd have seen those kind of appear now if they did have something in development, but they just haven't appeared. So it's like
Forspoken.
Forspoken.
Wait.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Let's move on to the final question. This one from Johnny_5A. Hey guys, with this being your 101st episode, only one question comes to mind. If you could send one gaming thing to Room 101, what would it be? Could be game, hardware, or something ephemeral like Stutter Struggle. Tom, have you had a think about this one? What thing drives you mad about gaming that you wish you could banish forever?
I mean, to go back to an earlier answer, it'd be Metal Gear Solid 4. Just because.
Wow.
Yeah.
So just to be clear, you want to expunge it from all existence.
But also have it remastered for
Oh, you can't have
in
both,
some
Tom.
form.
If you've expunged it from existence, if a Terminator was sent back in time to prevent the release of Metal Gear Solid 4,
Yeah.
you wouldn't be able to remaster it. I'm sorry.
That is a flaw to the plan for sure. Yeah, but it is just. I think it's the one game I wish. I remember playing it when it first came out. I was such a huge fan of MGS3, and it's the biggest gaming disappointment I've ever had. Seriously, by
Whoa.
far.
Wow.
Wow, this is
Huge
harsh
disappointment.
stuff. So, John, bearing in mind last week, where you kind of, as I
Oh,
said, if there'd been a table present to flip, it would have been flipped.
yeah.
I can pretty much guess what your one would be.
Oh, so I have a couple thoughts on this. One, I would say I might start with horse armor, but more in a broader sense, I would say microtransactions in general. I wish that would just go away forever and
Well, look, I
had
was
never
going to say
occurred.
games as a service, right? But by removing
Yeah.
MTX, you've essentially nullified
Yes.
the concept.
Exactly. That's the goal. Exactly. So that would be the big one. It's all microtransactions expunged forever. The other one I might say, just to rile people up a little bit for fun, uh, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare.
Wow.
I'll tell you
Wow.
why. There's two reasons. First of all, its success had a profound impact on both single and multiplayer games. For years, developers tried to make those extremely scripted, overly cinematic, not very interesting usually, shooter campaigns. I think it made the shooter worse for about a decade, and it took a while to recover from it, and we're finally back. Uh, but that's the lesser evil. The big problem I have is multiplayer. People loved that. I get it. But for me personally, and just for me, I actually think it kind of destroyed multiplayer gaming forever. It changed the focus from just having fun. I mean, Rich and I and Alex, when we played Quake the other day, it reminded me how fun that could be. Uh, Call of Duty changed that by focusing on the numbers and not Mason's numbers, but the actual like weapon. You get unlock, number goes up. I like seeing bars get bigger. Just that kind of stuff. It completely changed the focus to just that. It's all these micro games to it, the meta, and uh, I don't like any of that, and I never have. And as a result, after that, I basically completely fell out of online multiplayer games, and I have never been able to enjoy them again. And it's all due to this stuff that was added due to the success of Call of Duty. Halo was ruined by Call of Duty because it felt like Halo was my favorite multiplayer shooter. I loved it so much, but it felt like after Call of Duty took off, they just went into this mode of chasing Call of Duty-ish things in Halo multiplayer forever. So I deeply resent that game for what it did to the industry. Even though
Wow.
I think most people
Even though
think
it's
I'm
a great
insane.
game.
It is. I would say by itself, the game is extremely well made. I don't want to knock Infinity Ward for it. They did an awesome job with that thing. It's more that its success had a very nasty ripple effect on the industry that kind of, I don't care for. But again, that's just me personally. I'm sure like
I can understand.
99% of people are probably throwing their hands up and being like, "You are a crazy man. Why are you saying this stuff?" But that's
Yeah.
that's kind of my thoughts.
I totally get it. I mean, speaking as someone who's put hundreds of hours into Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, there's the game, and then there's the wider effect on the industry.
I will
And
say they made up for
it's
it
a
a little
shame.
bit with Titanfall 2, which is better than every Call of Duty game ever made, and did not get the attention it deserved at the time. That took the right. Call of Duty has some very good things. It's very snappy, responsive, but like when you're fighting guys, especially in the campaign, it's all like distant enemies. There's nothing interesting to the way the AI behaves, player position. There's no exploration or anything in the levels. You're just following a corridor. The AI or the scripted things all happen for you. You can't open any doors ever. You can't do anything on your own. You're just watching a movie and kind of it's the evolution of the FMV game. That's what it is. So Titanfall 2 is not
Wow.
that though. It's much better.
Fair enough. Okay. I've got two things to put in there. The first one is day one patches. This is entirely selfish. Basically, by my intention in putting day one patches into Room 101 would be that the games are actually finished, like say a month beforehand, and then we can actually get about our work.
Oh yeah.
Without having to worry about whether our work is going to be nullified in the next couple of days with the arrival of a patch, day one or otherwise. The second thing I'd like to put in, well, it's no surprise really, it's the Sega Master System, which
I knew it.
which, as I've mentioned many times, is only the master of evil. And I'm not even going to give any further reasons beyond that.
But Rich, without the Master System, Sega wouldn't have felt the need to improve and strive to do better with the Mega Drive.
Well, they could just get it right from day one.
Oh yeah, that's true.
The PC Engine was out. The PC Engine was out. That laid the template.
Yeah, the PC Engine's real good.
Okay, that's it. That's the end of the show. If you enjoyed it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for those. I'm actually going to say instant notifications now because I'm still... The Digital Foundry YouTube channel is still subscribed to that channel that I completely despise. And I'm still getting instant notifications whenever new content drops on that channel. So yes, please do like, subscribe, share, and indeed ring the bell for instant notifications whenever new Digital Foundry content drops, and the DF supporter programs. Just a joy for all of us, and amazing things happening there. And of course, you can get early access to this show and indeed contribute to it as part of the supporter program. So yeah, please do think about that. But that's all from us this week. Thanks for watching.